The summer sun hung lazily over Millbridge Square as locals bustled through their usual Tuesday routines. At precisely 1:17 p.m., Daniel Mercer, a quiet, well-dressed office clerk, stepped out of the post office, a small brown envelope in his hand. Witnesses later recalled how he paused at the edge of the fountain, checked his watch, and took a slow breath as if bracing himself for something. Then it happened. A mother sitting nearby glanced down to adjust her toddler's shoe. A delivery boy looked away for a moment to answer his phone. The florist turned to grab another bouquet. When all three looked back, Daniel was gone. No running, no scream, no struggle. One moment he was there. The next, empty air. Panic rippled through the square. People rushed over, searching behind benches and around the fountain. 2 officers arrived within minutes and cordoned off the scene. Strangest of all, the envelope Daniel had been holding was still lying on the stone edge of the fountain, untouched. No footprints. No camera saw him leave. It was as if the ground had opened and swallowed him whole. By sunset, the whole town buzzed with one chilling question. How can a man simply vanish in broad daylight, in front of everyone? Detective Laura Whitfield arrived at Millbridge Square just after dawn, greeted by a restless crowd murmuring in small clusters. The square, usually filled with coffee and chatter, now felt like a stage after a strange performance. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, framing the very spot where Daniel Mercer had last been seen. She began with the florist, Mrs. Jennings, whose trembling hands still held trimmed stems as she retold the scene for the 5th time. "I only looked away for a heartbeat," she insisted, eyes wide and damp. "He was standing right there, and then gone." The delivery boy swore he never heard any running or footsteps. The young mother, pale with guilt, whispered that when she looked up again the sunlight appeared slightly dimmer, as if a cloud had drifted across the sun. But there hadn't been a single cloud in the sky. Whitfield moved toward the fountain and crouched. The stone was completely dry. No skid marks or damp footprints, despite the fact the man had been standing right at the edge. Forensics confirmed it. No evidence of physical movement at all. She collected the small brown envelope. Inside was only a blank sheet of paper. Nothing written, nothing printed, just empty. As Laura turned the paper over in her hand, it suddenly felt unexpectedly cold, like something pulled the warmth from her fingertips. She frowned, glancing around the silent square. Someone or something had planned this. By the 3rd day, Millbridge was no longer a quiet town. It was the center of a mystery that no one could explain. The cafes buzzed with speculation. Children whispered theories on their way to school, and neighbors locked their doors earlier than usual. Some claimed Daniel had run off to escape hidden debts. Others insisted it was a staged prank gone wrong. But those who had been in the square knew something far darker had happened. Detective Whitfield sat in her temporary office, stacks of witness statements piled on her desk. But what unsettled her most wasn't what people had seen. It was what they hadn't. Not one person heard a sound. Not a footstep. Not a car door. Not even the flutter of clothing. She opened the coroner's preliminary report. No evidence of foul play. No signs of struggle. Case pending further investigation. Felt uselessly sterile. At the station front desk, an elderly man waited, clutching an old newspaper clipping. When Laura approached, he slid it toward her silently. It was dated June 12, 1978. Local man disappears in broad daylight. No trace found. Laura's breath caught. The details were almost identical. Even the fountain in the photo looked unchanged. She looked up to ask him a question, but the old man was already gone, leaving nothing behind except a faint scent of smoke and a chill that drifted down the hallway. Laura turned the yellowed clipping over. Scrawled in faded pencil were 3 words: "It's happening again." Detective Whitfield barely slept. With the old clipping pinned to her board and coffee in hand, she stepped into the surveillance room, determined to find something, anything, in the footage from the town square. The technician rewound to 1:17 p.m., and they watched Daniel step out of the post office in perfect clarity. He paused by the fountain, glancing down at the envelope in his hand. Ordinary movement, no one approaching. The digital clock in the top corner flicked to 1:18 p.m. Then the screen flickered. For exactly 1.4 seconds, static washed over the video, brief but unmistakable. When the image returned, Daniel was gone. No blur, no shadow, no motion trail. Just the empty space beside the fountain, as if he had never existed in the frame at all. "It's not a glitch," the technician muttered softly. The feed was completely stable all day, except for that moment. Laura leaned closer. Something else caught her eye. In the frame after the static, on the polished edge of the fountain, the sunlight reflected a faint outline. Not a human figure, but something tall and warped, like the distorted shadow of a figure standing just outside the camera's field of view. She paused the footage and slowly zoomed in. The shadow seemed to be watching Daniel's last position. But when she tried enhancing the frame further, the screen instantly snapped to black, and the playback system crashed without warning. Alarms suddenly beeped throughout the building. The other monitors were flickering too. Something else was now in the system. The IT team swarmed the surveillance hub, baffled by system-wide malfunctions. While technicians tried to restore the feeds, Detective Whitfield stepped away, uneasy. The shadow on the footage wasn't a camera error, it felt intentional. Back at the station archives, Laura pulled the 1978 case file referenced in the old newspaper clipping. Most of the documents were water damaged, but one envelope inside had remained sealed. She carefully opened it, revealing a faded black and white photograph. It showed the 1978 victim, a man named Peter Caldwell, standing at the very same fountain. But in the bottom corner of the image, almost hidden in the grainy shadows, Laura saw what looked like a tall, distorted silhouette, eerily similar to the one in the surveillance footage. Startled, she stepped backward and bumped into a filing cabinet. A metallic click echoed down the hallway. One of the drawers had popped open on its own. Inside wasn't another file, but a narrow metal door. She pulled it open and found a steep staircase dropping into darkness. No lights. No sign that anyone had used it for years. But as she stood at the top of the stairs, a faint sound drifted up, like paper being crumpled in someone's hand. Laura exhaled and began descending slowly, flashlight trembling. At the bottom, she found a small dusty room. On its moldy walls were dozens of missing person flyers, all dated June, spanning decades. In the center of the room sat a single item, Daniel Mercer's brown envelope. It wasn't dusty. It looked freshly placed. Detective Whitfield stared at the pristine envelope, lying impossibly clean among layers of dust. She reached out carefully and flipped it open. Inside was the same blank sheet of paper. But this time, faint letters began bleeding onto the page, as if written by an invisible hand. Not gone, just crossed. Laura's pulse spiked. She shoved the paper into a plastic evidence sleeve and hurried back up the stairway. As she emerged in the hallway, an officer rushed toward her. "Detective, you need to come outside. There's a woman demanding to speak with you. Says she saw Daniel Mercer today." Outside stood a middle-aged woman in a gray coat, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "You have to believe me," she said, wringing her hands. "I was walking past the old paper mill this morning, and I saw him, Daniel, standing at the fence. Laura waited. He didn't move or speak, just stared at me, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Then, her voice cracked. He stepped backward, and it looked like he sank into the ground, like the ground swallowed him. Laura's breath caught. "Did you notice anything else? Anyone nearby?" The woman hesitated. There was a shadow, tall, too tall, and it wasn't his. She pulled out her phone, trembling. I took a picture. The image was slightly blurred, but Daniel's face was unmistakable. His eyes were wide, terrified, and standing behind him was that same distorted figure, its outline sharper now, almost taking form. Before Laura could speak, the phone flickered, and the photo deleted itself. Detective Whitfield raced back to her office, heart pounding harder than she cared to admit. She pinned Daniel's reappearing photograph beside the 1978 case and the blank letter message. It wasn't random. It felt like pieces of a long-buried system, something repeating itself like a ritual. She began pulling archived missing person files from the storage room, specifically those that mentioned broad daylight disappearances. One by one, she laid them out on the floor. At first glance, the cases stretched over decades and seemed unrelated. Different names, different streets, different years. But then she saw it. Every case occurred during the second week of June. Each victim was last seen near a public landmark, a well, an old church gate, a park statue. And in the witness reports, there were always small details no one paid attention to. Sunlight suddenly dimmed, felt colder for a moment, a tall shadow at the edge of vision. Laura mapped the locations on a town plan. When she connected them, the plotted points formed a spiral pattern, with the fountain in Millbridge Square at its center. Suddenly, something clicked in her mind. The phrase from the envelope, "Not gone, just crossed." Crossed into what? Before she could process further, her office lights flickered violently. Papers fluttered as if hit by a wave of cold wind. Then, from down the hallway, came a faint sound. Footsteps, slow, heavy, and stopping right outside her door. The footsteps halted just outside the door, their echo lingering in the air like a warning. Detective Whitfield reached for her sidearm and inched toward the handle, pulse hammering in her ears. Silence. She yanked the door open. The hallway was empty. But on the floor, directly in front of her office, lay another brown envelope, identical to Daniel's. She crouched slowly and lifted it. The paper inside was already written this time, neat handwriting stretching across the page as though someone knew she would find it. "Do not open the door beneath the spiral. He is watching. And once you see him clearly, you cannot look away." The hairs on the back of her neck rose. She turned back toward the map on her wall, the spiral of disappearance points, and realized with a chill that the exact center wasn't the fountain itself. It was directly beneath the fountain. A service hatch, a sealed access tunnel built decades ago and long forgotten. She grabbed her flashlight and keys, heading straight to Millbridge Square. Twilight had already begun to fall, the last streaks of sunlight warping across the stone like twisted vines. At the base of the fountain, half concealed under ivy and grime, was a rusted metal hatch. She scraped the moss aside to reveal an engraved symbol, a spiral. Laura hesitated. Then she heard it, a faint voice from below. It sounded like Daniel. "Please, don't let it take me again." The hatch jolted under her hand, as if something on the other side had just pressed against it. Laura took a steadying breath and unlatched the hatch. It groaned as she lifted it, releasing a rush of cold, stale air that smelled of earth and old stone. A narrow staircase spiraled down into darkness. Somewhere below, The faint echo of Daniel's voice called again. Weak, desperate, fading. She descended. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though something unseen was trying to pull her back. The walls were damp and carved with crude spiral symbols, repeating over and over until she reached the bottom. There, the tunnel opened into a vast circular chamber. In the center stood Daniel Mercer, his back turned to her. "Daniel?" she whispered. He didn't move. Laura stepped closer and stopped. A tall, twisted shadow stood just behind him. It had no face, no eyes, and yet Laura felt its gaze pierce straight through her. Its outline shimmered, like something trying to manifest in the space between worlds. Daniel slowly turned his head toward her, eyes wide with terror. "It won't let me leave," he breathed. "It feeds when someone looks at it, when someone believes in it." The shadow leaned in, its form stretching. Laura raised her flashlight, and for a terrible second, she saw its full shape. It wasn't human. Instinctively, she slammed her eyes shut. "Daniel, run toward my voice. Don't look at it." Something hissed in the dark, massive and ancient. Laura kept her eyes shut and reached out blindly. Daniel's hand touched hers. But then another hand, cold and inhuman, wrapped around her wrist. Laura's heart pounded as the cold, inhuman grip tightened around her wrist. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, but she kept her other hand firmly around Daniel's, refusing to let go. Somewhere behind her eyelids, the shadow seethed, its whispering voice threading through her mind. "Look at me. See me." "No," she muttered. Daniel's voice trembled beside her. "If you open your eyes, it crosses over. That's how it's done it before." Laura's pulse steadied. In one sharp motion, she yanked her hand free from the creature's grasp and pulled Daniel toward the staircase. She moved with her eyes clenched shut, guided only by the echo of their footsteps and the cold, rank air growing warmer with each step upward. The hiss grew louder, furious. Something rushed behind them, scraping stone, twisting the air in the tunnel. But Laura didn't stop. She shoved Daniel upward and slammed the hatch shut just as a heavy thud struck from below. Silence. Then, the sound of the wind gently moving the trees around the square. Daniel collapsed beside the fountain, breathing hard, eyes glazed with shock. "It never wanted to take me," he whispered. "It wanted someone else to see it. Someone who would bring belief back to it." He glanced at Laura, fear returning to his gaze. "You saw it?" Even for a second, Laura froze. Somewhere beneath the stone, something scratched faintly at the hatch, almost like it was waiting. Was saving him the right thing to do, or did she just give the shadow a new target?